In the chaos of Ravenrock Valley, 1943, communication lines were destroyed, radios silenced, and hundreds of soldiers left stranded with no way to call for help. The bombs were already on their way, friendly fire that would wipe out their own. But hope came on feathered wings. Through smoke, gunfire, and storms, a single white-gray pigeon, known only as Shadow Wing, was released with a desperate message tied to its leg. The chances were impossible. The skies were filled with shrapnel, the enemy hunted anything that moved, and the clock was ticking down to seconds. Yet, somehow, Shadow Wing flew. Dodging explosions, pushing against the wind, bleeding from its wings, the bird carried a single piece of paper that meant life or death for an entire battalion. When the capsule finally reached headquarters, the order was stopped. The bombs never fell, and over 1,000 men who should have died in silence lived to see another dawn. This is not the story of a general, nor of a soldier with medals on his chest. This is the story of a forgotten hero, one who never spoke a word, but whose wings carried the weight of history itself. Ravenrock Valley, 1943. Nestled between the mountains, the battlefield was drenched in weeks of unending rain. Mud swallowed the trenches, and the sky was covered in a thick gray veil. Artillery fire never ceased, and every plume of smoke that rose from the ground only sank morale deeper. That day was worse. All communication lines had been destroyed, radios shattered, cables torn. The unit was stranded, cut off from the world. And worst of all, a mistaken order meant their own aircraft were preparing to bomb them. The soldiers in the trenches looked at one another in desperation. Some prayed, others closed their eyes and waited for the inevitable. Then, one soldier reached into a muddy crate and pulled out a bird, its white-gray feathers glimmering faintly even in the gloom. His name was Shadow Wing, and on his small shoulders rested the fate of an entire battalion. Quickly, the men scribbled a message onto a slip of paper and sealed it in a small metal capsule. "Stop the bombing. Friendly units below." With trembling hands, they tied it to Shadow Wing's leg. One soldier whispered, "Godspeed. Save us all." And the pigeon was released into the stormy sky. As his wings spread and carried him upward, the trenches fell silent. Every eye followed him, because in that fragile body, hope still lived. As Shadow Wing rose into the chaos, the battlefield seemed to roar against him. The skies were not open. They were a cage of fire. Enemy gunners had seen him. Machine guns rattled from the ridges, turning the sky into a storm of bullets. Each tracer streak glowed red in the smoke, painting fiery lines that crisscrossed the heavens. Shrapnel from nearby mortar blasts exploded like burning stars, forcing the small bird to weave, dive, and climb desperately. Then it happened. A jagged shard of metal clipped his wing. Pain ripped through him, and a small spray of white feathers spun into the wind. For a moment, Shadow Wing faltered, wings trembling, body tilting dangerously downward. Below, soldiers gasped, their last hope falling. But then, he pushed harder. The tiny bird beat his wings with everything left inside him. The wound burned, the air screamed with fire, yet he climbed back into the storm. In the trenches, men clung to their helmets, eyes locked on the fragile figure cutting through the smoke. One whispered, almost like a prayer, "If he makes it, so will we." Above the clouds, the hum of Allied bombers grew louder. They were seconds away from unleashing destruction on their own men. Shadow Wing's small body strained against the wind, the message capsule bouncing against his leg. Every beat of his wings was a race against time. Every second a heartbeat closer to disaster. And just as the first bomb bay doors began to open, Shadow Wing broke free of the smoke. The race had truly begun. Above the burning valley, Shadow Wing cut through the clouds, his wings aching with every beat. Behind him, the battlefield shrank into smoke and chaos, but ahead, the roar of engines thundered. The Allied bombers, massive silhouettes hung in the sky, their bellies open, bomb bay doors yawning wide. Inside each one rested death, tons of explosives seconds away from dropping onto their own brothers below. Shadow Wing tilted, forcing his battered body forward. The capsule clinked against his leg, its message trembling in the wind. His feathers were streaked with ash, one wing still bleeding from the shrapnel's kiss, but he flew harder, climbing into the teeth of the storm. From below, soldiers screamed, waving helmets, rifles, anything to be seen. But they were too far, too small. Their only voice was the bird above them. Inside the lead bomber, the crew prepared the release. One man glanced out of the window and frowned. Through the smoke and light, he thought he saw something, a flash of wings cutting across the gray horizon. He dismissed it as debris. Shadowwing pressed on. The sun broke through the storm for only a second, catching his feathers in a golden glow. To the soldiers below, it looked like a sign. To the bird, it was simply light against darkness. He was close now. The bombers loomed larger, their engines shaking the heavens. He dove toward the signal tower where headquarters waited, his path a narrow thread between survival and oblivion. And behind him, the first bombs shifted in their racks. Time had run out. Shadowwing's wings burned with pain, every beat slower than the last. The world around him blurred, tracer fire, clouds, smoke, and the looming shadows of bombers above Ravenrock Valley. Below, thousands of soldiers waited in silence, their lives hanging by a thread tied to a bird's leg. The first bombs began to shift in their racks. Metal clanged as bay doors creaked wider, and pilots above prepared to release. Seconds remained. Shadowwing pushed harder, his small heart pounding like a drum against his fragile chest. His feathers were torn, his body battered, but his eyes stayed fixed on one thing: the signal tower in the distance, its faint antenna rising above the smoke. Suddenly, another blast shook the sky. A wave of shrapnel tore past him. A shard grazed his side, sending him spiraling. For a moment, the world tilted, the ground rushing up. Gasps rose from the trenches below. But then, with a desperate twist, Shadowwing regained balance. His wings caught the wind, and he climbed again. The capsule bounced against his leg, still secure. Inside, the words waited: "Stop the bombing. Friendly units below." Shadowwing broke through the final layer of smoke, the sky clearing for a heartbeat. Ahead, the headquarters outpost came into view. Soldiers on the roof scanning the skies. One pointed, shouting, as the tiny silhouette darted toward them. Behind him, the bombs began to drop. It was no longer a race, it was a miracle. The bombs had already begun their descent, black silhouettes tearing through the air. Time was gone, hope was gone, and yet, through smoke and fire, Shadowwing hurled himself forward one last time. His body screamed with pain, his wings heavy and ragged, but the spark in his eyes never faded. The outpost came into view. Soldiers on the roof waved frantically, spotting the blur of white-gray cutting across the battlefield sky. One officer shouted, "Clear the line! He's carrying a message!" Shadowwing dropped from the sky like a dart, spiraling through tracer fire, and landed hard on the wooden ledge of the signal tower. His claws scraped, his chest heaved, but the capsule still clung to his leg. A soldier rushed forward, hands trembling as he unfastened the tiny metal tube. Inside, smudged by sweat and dirt, were the words that could change everything. "Stop the bombing. Friendly units below." The message raced across the outpost. Radios crackled, operators shouted, and within moments the urgent signal was sent to the bombers above. In the sky, pilots received the order. Confusion spread. Then, one by one, bomb bay doors closed. The falling bombs that had been released exploded harmlessly in the hillsides beyond. But the valley itself was spared. Shadowwing collapsed, wings spread against the wooden floor, his body trembling from exhaustion. Soldiers gathered around him in stunned silence. Some saluted. Some simply bowed their heads. For 1,000 men still breathing in the valley below, the tiny Pigeon had carried life itself. And in that moment, silence fell. The kind of silence born not of despair, but of awe. The valley was saved. Instead of a cratered graveyard, Ravenrock Valley remained scarred but alive. The men in the trenches, once resigned to die under their own bombs, now stared in disbelief at the silent sky. The rumble of destruction had faded, replaced only by the sound of wind sweeping over the battlefield. When word spread that it was not a general, not a radio, not even a miracle from command that had saved them, but a pigeon, Silence swept through the ranks. Then came the applause, shouts, even tears. Hardened soldiers, men who had seen too much, lifted their helmets in salute to a tiny bird who had carried their fate. At the outpost, Shadow Wing lay still, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. His wings twitched weakly. One soldier knelt beside him, stroking his feathers as though speaking to an old friend. Another placed a canteen lid filled with water beside his beak. The bird drank, slowly, trembling, but his eyes remained sharp. An officer stood nearby, holding the opened message capsule in his hand. His voice was low, almost reverent. "This bird just saved 1,000 men." The report reached higher command within hours. By evening, the name Shadow Wing was whispered not only in Ravenrock Valley, but across battalions stationed miles away. Soldiers who had never seen him swore they'd heard his story, and those who had watched him rise through smoke and fire would never forget. For the first time in weeks, hope returned to the valley, and in the center of it all lay a pigeon, too small to know he had changed the course of history. Months later, the war front shifted, but the legend of Ravenrock Valley had already spread. The tale of a single pigeon that had braved bullets, shrapnel, and fire to carry a message lived on in every campfire story and every soldier's memory. When the war finally ended, a ceremony was held in a quiet square far from the battlefield. Soldiers, officers, and townspeople gathered, their uniforms pressed, their faces solemn. At the center stood a simple wooden podium draped with flags, and there, perched on a small platform, was Shadow Wing. His feathers had grown back, his wounds healed, but his eyes carried the same fire as that day in the valley. The commanding officer stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. Inside lay a shining bronze medal, engraved not with rank or name, but with a single phrase: "For saving 1,000 lives." As the medal was gently placed on a ribbon around Shadow Wing's neck, the crowd rose to their feet. Soldiers saluted, families clapped, some wiped away tears. The officer's voice rang out, steady but filled with awe. Not all heroes march on two legs. Some fly with wings of silence and courage. In that moment, the world finally recognized what Ravenrock Valley's men had known all along, that a pigeon named Shadow Wing had not just saved lives, but carved his place in history. And as the applause echoed across the square, Shadow Wing ruffled his feathers, lifted his head proudly, and cooed softly, a sound as humble as the hero himself. The medal glimmered in the light, but the true honor was already written in the silence of those who lived to tell his story. Shadow Wing's courage reminds us that true heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they carry wings of silence and hope. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Every week we bring you new untold stories of sacrifice, loyalty, and courage, stories that deserve to be remembered. Join us and help keep these forgotten heroes alive.